We're searching for an answer, on a journey that will take us across England through towns, cities, villages and country abodes, in search of Britain's most marvellous churches. Today, our journey delivers us here, to this little village in the Yorkshire countryside. We're here in Laughton a town in the Yorkshire countryside, home to 1,200 people, and a church which has been on this site for over 800 years. And we're going into the past to uncover the mysteries, the quirks and the origins of the All Saints Church in Laughton. The question we want to answer, the one we believe is most important, has nothing to do with England or the churches all across it. What we want to know is far more important. We want to know what exactly makes this church so unique. But why is the church here in the first place? There has been a church on this site for over 800 years. And to answer that question, we have to go all the way back to the Anglo-Saxons. When the Romans left Britain, they left behind the Anglo-Saxons. The Saxons lived a quiet life, farming, trading and warring among themselves. They carved out their territories, and one of them, Edwin of Mercia, built himself a hall right here in the East Country. Edwin built a communal hall atop the hill. These halls were typically centres of administration, where the nobles would meet, akin to council chambers, deciding on matters of the region and hearing and solving the problems of the land. The place was called Laughton which meant Lawtown in the moors. Lawtown was a name the Saxons gave to important centres of administration, not ruling over whole kingdoms, but governing the regions on their behalf, and also, importantly, in the mid-900s, this place was a church for those very same nobles. Unfortunately for Edwin, his rule didn't last, because in 1066, the Normans came to Britain. They arrived as conquerors, sweeping aside the resistance and marching their armies up the country. The North put up a fight, particularly the Kingdom of Northumbria, but the better trained, better equipped and better motivated Normans routed the northern armies, and thus began the harrying of the North. The harrying of the North has been described as one of the first recorded genocides. The Norman armies stormed through the North and slaughtered anybody who tried to stop them. But what makes this truly evil is that they put men, women and children to the sword. They starved the North into submission, and they destroyed crops and salted the earth so that nothing could grow. The people of the North were forced to butcher their own cats and dogs just to stay alive, and even sometimes had to eat each other. It is believed over the winter of 1069 and 1070, up to 150,000 people died directly or as a result of this ruthless campaign across the region. Despite being barbarous, the harrying of the North was a success. The lands that once belonged to the Anglo-Saxons were transferred to their new rulers. The area of Laughton was given to Roger de Booley, whose family had close ties to William the Conqueror. He was given huge swaths of land in the north, including what is now South Yorkshire. To assert their dominance, they destroyed Anglo-Saxon buildings and replaced them with their own. Edwin's old hall was demolished, and a Norman castle rose up in its place. The old castle grounds are still here, situated just behind the church. Though the church was left standing, they eventually destroyed most of that too, and in its place, built their own. But they didn't totally wipe away the Anglo-Saxons. It was a whopping 120 years after the harrying of the north before the church was rebuilt in Norman style. But that wasn't even the first time that this church was rebuilt. This whole building is a patchwork of different architectural styles, all mashed into one. And there is no better place to explore that than here in the nave. Take a look over here, for example. These pillars on the north side, with their flowery design, were built in the 12th century and are in Romanesque design, which was popular with the Normans. But then, if you look over here, you'll see a different style completely. These were built in the 14th century and are octagonal, and they were built after the church was ruined during an attack on the town in 1322 during an uprising against Edward II. These are in Gothic style, which became popular all across England by this point. The whole church is a fantastic example of transitional architecture. However, one man influenced the design of this church more than any of the others, and his name was William of Wykeham, also known as the Great Church Builder. William is considered one of the most important men of the 1300s. He became Chancellor of England not once, but twice, and he was also made the Bishop of Winchester. William of Wykeham was one of the foremost architects of the 14th century, but he wasn't extensively educated. His list of accolades includes founding New College at Oxford, founding Winchester College, and being the surveyor of works at Windsor Castle and Windsor Park. His architectural genius was more innate rather than taught, it would seem. He became prebend of this magnificent church in 1363, in the same year he became a priest. Now, a prebend was someone who played a role in the administration of Anglican churches and got their income from the church as well. Because of this, it's likely that he was the designer of this church, and when it was rebuilt in 1377, William oversaw the works. All churches are full of beauty and rich in secrets, and this one has a few surprises that, if you don't look close, you might just miss. Now, one of the easiest ones to miss is this little fellow up here. These little men are called green men and are thought to be pagan in origin. They're found in many churches and are meant to represent rebirth and resurrection. They're often difficult to spot given they're usually situated up high or hidden amongst the detail. But there are other quirks in this church you could easily miss as well.
There's quite a lot of remnants of the Saxon church in stone, which is unusual because the Saxons' main building method was to build timber structures. Okay, so there could well have been a timber church here before the stone church was built, but we can't say that for certain. I think it's fair, in my opinion, it's a fairly safe bet. And then when Edwin or his people before him realised what a good site this was, they would have built the hall and the church, and the village would have sort of established itself around the two. The original Saxon church was at least partly destroyed and then rebuilt once the Normans had established themselves in control of this area. Norman architecture, everything, doors, windows, arcades, were round-headed, right? And that style of architecture went right back to Roman days, 1,000 years before. And as well as being called Norman architecture, it's also called Romanesque, to remind you that it was the Romans that invented that. Now, rounded arches are fine, but you can't build wide and tall windows because the force of the, the weight of the walls above in a semicircular arch pushes the window outwards and it would collapse unless, if you tried to build a big window, let's put it that way. Somebody then realised that a pointed arch window was much, much stronger than a semicircular because the weight was transferred by the points, if you like, down to ground, down the side. And from that day, when that style came into being, people realised they could build more window than wall. They were very clever people. I mean, the people that designed these churches, the master mason, used a floor to draw out by hand to scale every little feature of the church. And then some other genius, and I'm not using that word disparaging, came up and took a template of each of the, and passed that on to the masons who would then carve to the template.
One of the most fascinating features about this church is just how many other churches appear to be mashed into one. And there is no better example of that than down there in the chancel. Look around the walls and you'll see a plethora of odd stones. There are multiple bricked up windows dotted along each wall. These are thought to be Norman, possibly from the 13th century. But way back there on the south side is a piscina set into the wall, which uses two large slabs of Rotherham red sandstone, and it is thought that this predates the Norman conquest. Now, the next feature of note is right behind you, and I can guarantee everybody has seen this. I am, of course, talking about the font, which, as you can see, everybody walks past when they come in. Now, some of you may know that this is used for baptisms, but some of you may not know that the top and the bottom are centuries apart. You see, the base of the font was made when the rest of the church was rebuilt in the late 14th century. Now, sometime in the 13th century, fonts across England were ordered to be locked in order to prevent hallowed water being used for black magic. However, what makes the font cover so interesting is that it was actually made in the 17th century, meaning the font cover and the base were made some 300 years apart. Now, the reason for that could be that old font covers were likely less ornate, and it became fashionable to have more elaborate ones in the late 17th century, and this was done in order to enhance the importance of baptisms. If you come around down here, at the front of the south aisle, you'll find the Lady Chapel. It's way down here in the bottom corner. In the 1200s, there was a push towards devotion to Mary as a mother and a woman, and thus churches across the country began building lady chapels to honour her. What makes this chapel special in particular, though, is, well, take a look down here. What this table stands on today is the remains of a stone altar. Now, this is a pre-Reformation altar and was buried here in the 1500s underneath the south aisle where we stand today, as altars were banned in 1548 as the church tried to distance itself from Catholicism. This was rediscovered in the late 1800s. Now, before we go outside, there's one more thing I think you'll want to see. So it's time to step away from the architecture just for a moment and appreciate something else entirely. This church was built at the highest point in Laughton. That's probably why the castle was built here too, if I had to guess. This church actually has an old nickname. People used to call it Lighten in the Morning, a play on Laughton and Limorthan. Locals gave it the name owing to the way the sun would beam from behind the spire in the early hours of the day. And there are secrets carved into the stone. Look here and you'll see, only faintly, 1698, carved into the side of the tower, believed to be a mason's mark. But you should also look around the corner, because someone carved their handprint into the stone, possibly an assistant mason, who may have been illiterate. The spire has a commanding view from up on the hill, and on a clear day, you can see over 40 miles, all the way to Hull. Whew, those steps are a bit tight. Now, here's something we don't tend to think about. We're so used to skyscrapers and towers and planes. We don't think what it must have been like for a medieval peasant back then. Churches must have been the tallest buildings they'd ever see, with the grand spires rising over the landscape. But there is something else in here worth talking about as well.
What used to happen as you came into the year 6, they used to take you up the tower as a leaving present. So obviously early memories were sort of climbing the tower. You sort of get to the top and you see the village for the first time from 100 and some feet up and realise how small it is. Because obviously as a small child you think everything's big, and then you sort of go up there and you're looking around, you can see so-and-so's house, you can see pub. At that point we had 2 pubs in the village, which we've obviously not got anymore. Unfortunately now, due to health and safety, we'll get health and safety, and the children now can't go up the tower. So what we decided to do then is, obviously, once we'd started bell ringing, is we'd let them have a go at bell ringing. Because obviously we had a chap called Mr. Booth. He'd tolled the bell at the back of church. So one day I walked in, I was probably 8 or 9, and said, "Excuse me, Mr. Booth, but can I have a go at that?" And he said, "No." Now, an 8-year-old kid doesn't forget, does he? So then obviously once we started bell ringing in 2004, for me, I wanted as many people as I could to ring them bells, because obviously it's something that you never forget.
Church bells have been ringing in England since the 7th century, and this church here has 3, with the oldest dating back to the 16th century. They were cast at a foundry in Chesterfield, and this bell up here was actually the smallest that foundry ever made, weighing around 650 pounds. Whilst these bells are ringable, unfortunately the frame cannot withstand the force of traditional full circle ringing. When you visit the church, you'll see a bell on the floor inside the nave. This dates back to the 1800s and was rescued from another church. The church now is trying to raise the money to install a complement of 6 bells, and as of right now, they're still trying to hit their target. So let's keep our fingers crossed, and maybe one day we'll hear these bells ring once again. Right, just got to get back down now. As you walk around the church, you'll notice just how patchy the brickwork is. Well, there's actually a very good reason for this. Laughton Church isn't just a mix of different buildings put together at different times. It's also a mix of different stone from quarries all over the place. You've seen the Rotherham red sandstone inside the church, and the same stone was used on the outside as well, around the lower parts of the chancel here. Other stone used was magnesium limestone, which you can see as the grey stone in the pilasters. However, some parts of the church were built from whatever old stone they had available at the time. Now, take a look at this. If you look closely, you'll see a chevron carved into the stone. This is the only one of its kind around here, meaning this must have come from somewhere else. And this is just what churches did. Materials were precious, and so whatever they could reuse, They did. Which brings us to one of the most remarkable parts of this church, and something truly unique. Remember how the Normans came barrelling through the north, destroying every last vestige of the Saxons? Well, it turns out they didn't. And in fact, some of what the Saxons built is still with us today. On the north side of the tower, the Saxon doorway has survived for well over 1,000 years. The outer, larger arch is the old Saxon doorway, and at some point the Normans built their own in the middle. The Saxon arch is one of the oldest parts of the church and speaks to an ancient history. I mean, what must it have been like to be a Saxon noble, coming up the hill and seeing the tower over the trees, and then stepping through this door? And we can imagine what it must have been like, because they came here for the same reasons that we do. We come here to worship God, be closer to ourselves and be a part of something greater. We may be centuries apart, but we're not so different. Not at all.
Faith is everything to me because, life is a challenge for us all. And, you can easily get lost and distracted with all the things of life. We live in such a commercial world. We live in a world where it's all about money and success and getting on in life. And if that involves stepping on somebody else to get to where you want, that is life. And the Bible grounds me, the humility of it. The teaching is that Jesus didn't come to be Lord, he came to serve. He washed feet, he went with the sinner, and everyone was inclusive. And that is the wonderful thing of my faith. It is all inclusive. And that's the bit, it means so much to me. Like a lot of people, I was brought up with parents who went to church. I lived in a little village called Woodhouse Mill, which not too far away, 7 miles away or something, and Mum and Dad were involved with the church there. So I grew up going to church. But like a lot of people, like a lot of children, you get to an age and you think, no, it's not for me, it's not cool. I'd rather be out playing football on a Sunday than, going to church. So it was a period of time. But when I met Heather, my wife, her parents were involved in the church where they lived. And when we married, we decided we wanted to go back to church. And so that's what we did. We went back. But it was, growing up, we had a background in church. But had to make a decision for ourselves. It wasn't a smooth course. There was a few ups and downs and bumps along the way, but we did come back, and we've been part of this church ever since my children were born.
I think, because people say to you, do you believe in God? And it's hard to believe in something that you can't see, you can't touch. But for me, it's more of a way, a life, and a path that you follow. You're born, you're married, you're buried. And for me, you sort of look at it, it's a way, it's a structure, and it's a path to follow. But when I was confirmed, the vicar said, do you believe in God? I said, look, I can't really answer that. I said, hopefully there is something bigger and better than me. But obviously for me, it's a way of moving my life forward, and it's a structure which we all sort of try and follow. And I don't know. I refer to this as, it's my father's house. It's God's house. It's not my house. And people ask, yeah, it's God's house. And you come in, and there's sometimes I'll just sit at the back of church and have a quiet bit of reflection. And people say to you, well, do you pray? And you think, everybody prays, because they say, oh my God, oh this, I hope he's all right. This, and in a subconscious way, you are. And you'll have 5 minutes and you think, I hope so-and-so's all right. Technically, but you're not doing it, you're doing it subconsciously. You're not realising that you're actually doing that. And people say, oh, I don't believe in God, I'm an atheist, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, but there is something bigger and better in this universe than me. And obviously you look back and you think, well, why have they built this magnet? Somebody 700 or so years ago had that same thought. Why have they built? They've built it for a reason, and the reason is obviously it's a structure that we follow, and it is a magnificent building that they've built on the grounds of something. What it could be, I can never answer you that question until I obviously get to the pearly gates and St Paul's there asking me name and the rest of it. I don't know, which none of us know, but hopefully it's a structure. It's part of my village. It's part of my DNA. It's just I fit in, and it's realistically, I think I'd be lost without the church and the village. So yeah, it is a big part of me.
But a church is more than just a monument. It's a centre of tradition that brings people together. One of those traditions is the Harvest Festival. Now, these festivals have been going on since before the Romans. It started. Better head inside. Every year, people come together at the Harvest Festival to celebrate the last harvest. It's a big deal for farming communities, a celebration of all the hard work throughout the year. Shh, it's starting. People come from all over to listen to music, meet friends, share food, and welcome the end of the season. A celebration of all that was and all that's to come as they settle into the first months of winter. This church is a place of celebration, a place where people like you and me can be a part of the indefinable fibre that holds together a community, a place that gives you somewhere to belong, and a church like Laughton can bind us to a place in more ways than one. A church is not just a place of worship and celebration, it's also a place of remembrance. The war in 1914 was unlike any war before it. It was an industrial war where men died as efficiently as factories could churn out bullets. Now I want you to imagine the scale of the loss. Laughton today has a population of around 1,200 people, but our country as a whole during the First World War lost 880,000 people. That's 733 times the population of Laughton. So just look at the village, at the houses, the gardens and the streets that make up Laughton, and imagine it stretching out to the horizon for 360 miles. And imagine that all of it, every single home, is empty. That's the scale of the loss. And even for Laughton, 347 men went off to fight from a population of only around 1,800, about a fifth of the village at the time. But consider, of those 1,800, only some of them would have been eligible to fight, some of them too young, and many of them too old, meaning that 347 could have been every man in the village. 51 of Laughton's men died in the First World War, and 31 gave their lives in the Second. And the memorial to honour these men was unveiled here on Sunday the 17th of June 1923. It was unveiled by the Earl of Scarborough in a ceremony that drew around 6,000 people to the village. The memorial, which stands at around 12 foot tall, only a little taller than me, is made of granite and was sculpted by a nearby craftsman, a Mr. Borrowdale from Worksop. Its most striking feature is the soldier who looks down at you from his pedestal, his arms reversed. That is, his gun pointed at the floor and his arms resting on top, which was done as a symbol of mourning by soldiers for the men who fell in the line of duty. But not all of them were men. Some, tragically, were just boys. There are two Commonwealth war graves here at Laughton, and they both tell a rather tragic tale. Cyril Woodward was a second-class aircraftman in the RAF. Now, this was a training rank, meaning he likely hadn't been in the war for very long. He was serving, we believe, as a gunner at the 757 Defence Regiment in County Antrim, all the way in Northern Ireland. He died on the 21st of October 1941 and was buried here 4 days later on the 25th. And right in front of me is the gravestone of Donald Broddle. He was baptised at this very church. Like Cyril, he too was a second-class aircraftman and joined the Volunteer Reserves in 1944, meaning he wasn't a year into his training until he died. He died at the Lancaster Royal Infirmary on the 10th of June 1945, a month and 2 days after the war had ended in Europe. While we don't know much about the causes of death for these two lads, what we do know is they were both only 18 years old. Now, I don't think we fully appreciate just how ancient Laughton actually is. I mean, take the War Memorial for example. This is probably the newest thing here, and even this is over 100 years old. In 2023, the village came together again, just like it did all those years ago, only this time it was to celebrate the centenary of the unveiling of the War Memorial. They planted poppies all along here, along the front of the church. There was also a parade up to the church and a brass band in the yard, all brought together as a reflection of the people who did the same thing a century in the past. And I think that if we take anything from looking at our churches, it's that they're not just places of worship, and they're not just static memorials that remind us of our ancestors. They're living places where we walk in their footsteps. Our churches are more than just glass and stone. They are a journey through time made manifest, a link to our ancient roots. We've witnessed our ancestors, their rise and their fall. We've seen the beauty of the land and walked in the footsteps of heroes. Our churches are not museums, they are not relics. They are living, breathing monuments to our past, our present and our future. They have stood for thousands of years, uniting us, consoling us, and welcoming us home. Our history is embedded into their walls. Their figures have seen empires rise and whole nations fall. Our churches have stood for over 1,000 years, and here's to 1,000 more. So, what's the answer? What makes this church so special? You know what? I'll let you decide.